Hello and welcome to Cannabis and the Body Lecture 5. This one we're going to start talking about pharmacokinetics, and that is how does your body deal with the drug? When the drug is put inside your body, how does what you've eaten, or how much body fat you have, or how active your liver is, how do those influence the effects of the drug? And pharmacokinetics deals with dosing, the route of administration, how the drug is absorbed into your bloodstream and where it's sent to, how it's metabolized, mostly by your liver, what other drugs it might interact with, and then finally, how do you eliminate? So we will start with dosing. Dosing is very, again, different. Cannabis is different in so many ways. It's much more personalized and individualized for cannabis. There isn't one single ratio or strain or product that's right for everybody. Xanax, they say, here, take your 0.5 milligrams of Xanax, which they shouldn't do because not everybody responds the same to that as well. But cannabis, more than many other drugs, it really is very individual. It depends on your endocannabinoid system and your makeup, your gender, your size, your age, what specific symptoms you have. How is your endocannabinoid system? And different people have different activity in their endocannabinoid system, many different things. And so dosing is really, you can't just say it's this dose. Some people will get relief with 1 milligram a day of THC, and others can take thousands, up to 2,000, so 2 grams a day without real adverse effects. Very individualized. But let's talk about the dose response curve, and this is different than it is in most other drugs. Most other drugs are what we call a monophasic dose response curve. So what a dose response curve is, you look at the dose and what is the response? Our dose is on the x-axis and response is on the y-axis. And basically a higher dose usually leads to stronger effect, and then usually it tapers off. So if you're taking, for instance, morphine for pain, a higher dose will give you more pain relief, but at some point you have maximal pain relief. And so it's going to be a curve that goes up and then flattens out in a plateau. Cannabis is different. Cannabis is a biphasic dose response curve. So it looks more like this. A monophasic curve would look, goes up and up and up and up, and then it's going to plateau here. But cannabis is biphasic, and this, just looking at the structure of it, it makes sense because we know cannabis is for balance. This is a nice balanced structure here. But let me explain what this biphasic dose response curve means in the real world. So here we are, we take a low dose of cannabis, and here is our benefit or our effect. So it doesn't have to be effect, we'll just look at it as benefit. Low dose might not have that much effect or might not have that much benefit. And the first time many people use cannabis, they often don't get high a lot of the times. Early use can, by itself, increase production in your endocannabinoid system. That may be one reason why we think people don't get high the first time. So it's kind of like you have to trigger it, you have to entrain it to work. But a low dose, okay, we're not having an effect, we're not having an effect. As we increase our dose, look, we're having an effect, hooray, we're starting to feel something until we reach optimal dose. So it's not the highest dose we can possibly take, but for every person it's different. We take a dose, and that's our best effect. And what we see then is if you keep increasing it, thinking, well, 10 milligrams was good, but 20 would be better. No, 20 milligrams might be worse. So this is individual for everyone. Low dose not having as much benefit. Optimal dose right here. And then as you get higher and higher, you actually start to have more side effects, a worse effect. One example, I have the little barfy emoji here. There's something called cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. And there are more people showing up in the ER that with uncontrollable vomiting. So it's usually associated with high doses of cannabis, especially high THC, and you just can't stop barfing. And we think it's related to calcium channels. Cannabis inhibits calcium channels, and calcium blocks, when you block calcium, it's associated with nausea and vomiting. You do not have to know this. And these calcium channels are temperature sensitive. So one of the things that help people who have this cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is hot showers and hot baths. All right, a little aside there, but the point is it's a biphasic dose response curve. Low dose is not doing as well. You find your optimal dose, and more can have a more negative dose. More negative effect. Talking a little bit about safety, and this is related to dose. I want to bring up the idea of the therapeutic index. Therapeutic index is a measure of how safe a drug is. And it's a very simple ratio. It's the lethal dose of a drug in 50% of the subjects over the effective dose of the drug in 50% of the subjects. And this is mostly done in animal studies. When you're doing it in people, you do it, it's not just 50-50, it's going to be like 99-1. But we have more research, we have more data on the therapeutic index, which is lethal dose in 50% over the effective dose in 50% of the subjects. So for example, I'll just go with phenobarbital. Effective dose, let's say you take 1 pill and it puts you to sleep. If you take 3, that can kill you. You got a 50-50 chance of dying if you take 3 times the effective dose. So 3 over 1 is the therapeutic index for phenobarbital. That's very low. The lower the therapeutic index, the more dangerous the drug is. So it's a ratio of the dose that causes death in 50% of the subjects over the effective dose. And I'm going to give you some of these numbers. So phenobarbital is about a 3. Alcohol is between 4 and 10. Let's just call it 6. Let me explain that. Let's say the effective dose in you to get drunk, it takes you 4 drinks in an hour. All right, so you do 4 shots in an hour, you're drunk. That's your effective dose. If you do 6 times that, you do 24 shots in an hour, you got a 50-50 chance of dying on the spot. And it may be as high as 10. If you do 40 shots in an hour, you got a good chance that you're going to die. So it's a fairly low therapeutic index. It's a dangerous drug. So therapeutic index for alcohol is a ratio of about 6-1, about 24-4, for instance. Alcohol is about a 6 therapeutic index. Heroin is also a 6. So whatever dose gets you high, 6 times that, you got a 50-50 chance of dying. Cocaine, jumped ahead. Methamphetamine is about a 10. And anything with a therapeutic index of 10 or lower is considered a dangerous drug. I find it interesting that alcohol is our legal drug. It's fairly 88,000 deaths a year. It's fairly dangerous. Cocaine is about a 15. MDMA, that's ecstasy or Molly, that's about a 16. Nicotine, 21. So if you smoke 1 cigarette, that's an effective dose of 1. If you put a whole pack of cigarettes in your mouth and light them all up, you got a 50-50 chance of dying on the spot. Not of cancer 20 years later, but on the spot of nicotine poisoning. Nicotine is quite toxic. And 480,000 deaths a year due to smoking. Let's see, morphine, 70 is the therapeutic index or so. Prozac is about 100. Valium is about 150, 160. Aspirin is 199. So if you take 2 aspirin tablets for a headache, if you take 400, you got a 50-50 chance of dying. Caffeine's about 1,000. So people do die of caffeine overdoses, but you have to drink an awful lot of coffee to do so. Let's see, LSD. LSD is about 4,800. Now it works on a very low dosage, but it's a fairly high therapeutic index. It's one of the safer drugs. It is a Schedule I drug, along with marijuana. Cannabis therapeutic index is at least 1,000. Some estimate it as high as 40,000. And it's only an estimate because, as we've said before, there is no known overdose of cannabis. So it's one of the highest known therapeutic indices of any drug known. Yet, it is a Schedule I drug. Now, just incidentally, a 40,000 therapeutic index would mean that you'd have to consume 1,500 pounds of marijuana in 15 minutes. Good luck. All right. Back to the dosing, because it's related. So what is the optimal dose? What is it? How do you get the right ratio? What do you tell somebody? They walk into a dispensary. What do I want? How much do I take? And it's not that simple. So first you want to determine what ratio do you want? Do you want a high THC or a high CBD? Or do you want a 1-to-1? And a lot of that depends on what effect you're looking for. If you want anti-seizure, then you're good with just mostly CBD. If you want anti-pain, anti-cancer, you want to go higher THC. But there's no one right answer, but it depends on what you have. How many milligrams? How much do you start with? The saying is start low and go slow. All right, you don't just dive in with 50 milligrams. You start with 2. So THC, if you're a newbie, you might start with 1 to 5 milligrams per dose, maybe even 1 to 2 milligrams per dose, and wait and see. They really recommend that you take a dose, go slowly, keep track of how you feel, keep a journal. I took this amount of this ratio and I feel X, and there are apps for that. Strain Print has an app, and Relief has RELEAF. That's an app as well, and you can put in what you've just taken and monitor how you're feeling and keep track of that. And then you're going to increase it until you start feeling worse. You reach that optimal dose. When you start to feeling worse, go back. So now CBD, you can take a little higher. You can start at about 10 milligrams. And you can get maybe up to 200 milligrams per dose. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving any advice on what you should take. Important safety tip, I am not a physician. I'm a doctor, just a PhD, not a physician. So I'm not telling you what you should take, but start low and go slow. It also depends if you're going a full spectrum or an isolate. Really, it's kind of better in most cases to get a mix of the cannabinoids because of the ensemble effect. But that will play a role in your dose. Route of administration also plays a role in how much you're going to take. If you are smoking or vaping, if you're inhaling it in some way, it works faster and it doesn't work as long. If you are ingesting it, if you're doing an edible, it can take an hour or 2 until it kicks in, but then it lasts hours, 8 to 12 hours. So you're going to have to adjust your dose, and you're going to have to consider why you're taking it. You need it for breakthrough pain? Use a vape, or a vape flower, or vape the oil, or smoke. If you want overnight relief, then an edible or something with slower onset might be better. Also for dosing, you might want to space out smaller doses throughout the day, and again, observe your response. So much of this is see how you feel. Start low, go slow, observe, pay attention, and pay attention to your body, not what somebody else is telling you. There's no one right answer for cannabis. It's not take 325 milligrams of this. It's how do you feel? And that's one of the wonderful things about cannabis. It's going to change Western medicine, I believe. And we'll talk about that later. But I think I'll close this one out now, and in the next one, we'll talk about routes of administration.